Hey guys, I hope you're well. As you can tell by the beautiful skyline behind me, I am reporting to you from Austin, Texas, and I actually have a full-fledged court report. Yes, I was finally able to attend court, so this is the real deal. We are talking about Pearlsnappy, who has been one of the most vociferous opponents of Scientology based in Austin and got quite a bit of fans after her forceful efforts during the Ideal Org opening in the city of Austin. So Pearlsnappy, this noted protester, today was looking at 2 misdemeanor charges that results in disorderly conduct. So I'm going to tell you the result first so I don't leave you in suspense, and then we will analyze the crux of the case, and then I'll go word from word. So the result, before anything else, is mostly positive, but not a complete victory. I would say it's essentially a 75% victory. It's a good enough victory. It sets a good precedent for judges looking at further cases as to how to rule. So all in all, a good battle we're fighting for. She got declared guilty on one charge and not guilty on the other. With the guilty charge, she is only paying a $124 fine versus the original $400. So no probation, no worse outcomes other than that. She is welcome to continue protesting. That's certainly good news. She's not on thin ice for anything. So largely, for all intents and purposes, I would call it a victory. And by the way, guys, now that you have the result, if you do want to donate and help with lodging, because I'll have a lot of court to cover, in addition to the lodging for this court case, I will be driving out to LA to cover ZDT and everything else in February. So if you want to chip in for gas or crummy motel money, GoFundMe and all that, Venmo, Cash App is all on there. So why was there a disconnect? Why was there a division of rulings? Long story short, and I'll get more into detail, is the attorney for the Scientology, well, the prosecutor in this case, who's probably clearly influenced and has the ear of Scientology, the prosecutor remarked that Pearlsnappy was so loud, especially because she had a bullhorn, as well as a device that mimics the noise of a police siren. So he said because they had a specifically scheduled worship service at a specific time, Pearlsnappy's loudness drowned out the service and the witness claim made it impossible for the services to continue. The judge felt that all the arguments as to why Pearlsnappy should be declared guilty for the other offense, which didn't have anything to do with interfering church services. One was based on interfering worship. One with this misdemeanor threats and harassment were kind of used as the reason to provide the other misdemeanor, which the judge did not buy. So that's the good news. She's allowed to protest. There's no specific ban, nothing like that. There isn't a chance for an appeal as well. So that's certainly good news. And it's an interesting case, guys. You see a lot of the same themes that you've been seeing in other Scientology RO cases, or even cases brought on by the prosecutor. And shockingly, one of the witnesses was a tiny, diminutive old man. Shocking. We've never seen that. We've never seen that with Street, with DOA, Philip Campos. You can tell that with Danny, Scientology has this desire to try to get somebody to be their stooge, and they want to try to get the kind of most pathetic, sympathetic, weak-looking person possible so they could sort of try to play victim in the whole situation. And it's hilarious how, whether it be Joey Rockets with Streets, whether it be Philip Campos with Danny, or whether it be this old man, they all look the same. They're all bald old men with little bits of hair on either side. This dude had a cane and was hunching over very pathetically. And this is literally the third guy that they're like clones of each other. I think Scientology just has this laboratory where they produce pathetic old men that could be stooges and try to shut down these protesters. Luckily, the old man was not successful in this situation. Another thing that really did help Pearlsnappy is that one of the officers who was responsible and wanted to go forward with designating a crime on Pearlsnappy, he had a conversation outside of the courtroom, apparently about that case, incredibly stupid, and the judge ruled that his entire testimony as a witness, the officer who was responsible for the arrest, because of that one conversation, the officer's testimony was nixed. He was not allowed. The officer has an interesting history. He was actually part of, you got some background music now, hopefully it's not too loud, he was actually part of the sheriff's department, I believe, in Los Angeles for 17 years. So again, when people are shouting conspiracy and feeling, does Scientology have their hands in various prosecutors' pockets, you can't help but wonder. This guy knew LA. He might have had some connections. So it's always interesting to think out loud, because you don't want to directly blame anything on Scientology, because technically they're not really part of this case. This is something that the prosecutors are kind of hoisting upon. But it's bizarre that the prosecutors, it's very rare where such a minor incident like this would even go forward with a court and it wouldn't be necessarily reflexively dropped. So it always seems like when there's a Scientology case, the police want to go harder on the victim, right? They're slapping on all this additional shit to the so-called perpetrator, and they put in all this effort to go out of their way to make the arrest, to actually go through the process of crossing their T's and dotting their I's to actually prosecute them. And it doesn't seem like that's the normal process. And again, I think in this process with Austin, the normal process was not necessarily followed, which leads me to believe that there might have been some serious chicanery afoot in that capacity. So Pearl was very effective on the stand, knew what she was doing. I'll read the quotes exactly, but there was one of the biggest arguments that the attorney, Pearlsnappy's attorney, was successful in remarking upon is he was asking a Scientology staffer, and he asked the staffer, okay, so you're recording the sound decibel? And the staffer said yes, and it went above, it went to as much as like 90, and the allowable limit of noise decibel is 81. But then he remarked that as he was measuring the decibels, it would vacillate anywhere between 71 and somewhere between the mid-90s, meaning that it's entirely possible for the majority of the time that the decibels might have been simply left at 71, which is well under the legal noise limit. So essentially based on that was a pretty impressive loophole that the attorney for Pearlsnappy was that he found. Based on that, the judge declared Pearlsnappy not guilty. So that was kind of efficient thinking on the judge's part, but it was harder to answer a lot of the other aspects of the case. So let us start with opening statements. This case, says the opening attorney, Mr. Prince, this case is quite straightforward. On March 12th and 17th, and by the way, the prosecutors kept mucking up the dates, perhaps so intentionally so they could plaster on more extreme verbal assaults, as they would feel, that Pearl has said, and to try to slap it on to these dates that don't have anything to do with each other. Here's the other thing. Pearl, compared to a lot of other meaner words that other protesters have uttered, or physical acts of aggression that protesters have committed, Pearlsnappy hasn't done any of those, and she hasn't really said anything uniquely, deeply horrific or evil or horrendous or offensive. She said, fuck you, and you are a coffin dodger, but nothing like, I know about your family or ex. So, there have been much worse rhetoric, and there's been a lot of consternation about Pearlsnappy's rhetoric just because her voice is so audible. But at the end of the day, her rhetoric is not that personal and not really, intentional to make the person feel shitty. It's to really expose Scientology, make Scientology feel bad. So her rhetoric, compared to some others that I've witnessed, nobody, gotta love Danny, but nobody pepper sprayed anybody. So, it's very mild compared, I think, to a lot of the other cases. So forgive me, we'll start with the opening argument. So Prince says, this case, the attorney Prince, or prosecuting attorney Prince on the other side says, case is straightforward. On March 12th and 17th, I'm just going to say Pearlsnappy. I don't want to give her name. Pearlsnappy was outside a public sidewalk using a bullhorn with a siren. Her actions were unreasonable and offensive. She is guilty of disorderly conduct. Pearl's attorney said, my client has demonstrated that what she is doing is simply exercising her freedom of speech. And at the time she was verbally assaulted, she felt apprehension and fear. She felt apprehension and fear by those in the Church of Scientology. We ask you to find Pearlsnappy not guilty. Using a bullhorn was her defense in that situation. So a bunch of based on this is, as I was remarking before, one of the witnesses on the stand was this pathetic old man. One of the claims of the old man said is he felt he was being verbally harassed by Pearlsnappy after he did his best to spray off some chalk that an anti-Scientology person was drawing, and then he kind of like got in the camera like that, and afterwards, which they kind of used against him, but that was all kind of in the same moment. And so now Mike Sullivan, this pathetic old man is his name, he comes to the stand. Prosecuting attorney is now questioning him. Mr. Prince says, have you met Pearl before? Mike says, yeah, she was coming to protest for a number of months. And I had my first encounter with her at the event 2 months before we opened in February. During that event, she was telling me to get the fuck out of there. I felt threatened. An officer filed a complaint, I think, on the 17th. And then the attorney's like, are you sure it's that date? And he's like, oh, can I show you? And then the prosecuting attorney like had to find the correct date so he could confirm it. So on March 12th, Mike says, who's on the witness stand, I was inside my church building. Pearlsnappy was outside making noise. I figured I would head out, and I would record it with my phone. Pearlsnappy got her bullhorn and siren going. She said, get away from me. I was 8 feet from her. And she said I had a right. She said she had a right to be on the sidewalk. Then a Church of Scientology staffer escorted me back inside. I was feeling scared. It was loud inside as well. And Prince says, what's the closest that Pearlsnappy got to you? Mike says, only 8 feet. I mean, as much as 8 feet. Mr. Prince says, would you consider the noise to be unreasonable noise? Mike says, yes. This is on the street. There's no shooting range nearby. This was not in a private residence. This is at my church. And then they show a video of Pearlsnappy screaming. And Mike says, noise is going on. And I could hear inside when I came back into the church as well. That's why I walked outside and turned on my camera. And the video plays, and Pearl says, don't touch my shit, man. Don't get near me. And she says, Mike, I have the right to be here, public sidewalk. And the prosecuting attorney says, so the video shows that this noise was unreasonable. Were you trying to purposely block her First Amendment right? Mike says, no, I was just recording. And then Pearlsnappy's lawyer goes on the stand. And he says, what day, again, is this video? Pearlsnappy's lawyer talks with Mike. And he says, what day, again, is the video we're reviewing? And Mike says, March 12th, I think. And Pearl's lawyer asks, so were there speakers outside the building? Mike says, no. Pearl's lawyer says, was there anything from the Church of Scientology playing over their speakers? Mike says, perhaps, sometimes they play stuff, but she started using a bullhorn. And she called me an idiot. So Mike, you can see, is very quickly changing the subject, because what this lawyer is doing is he's already proving that Scientology admits their own noise pollution. That Scientology will often have their speaker and have stuff playing from their speaker and also contributing to the noise pollution, which, by the way, may very well increase the amount of decibels. If it was simply not Pearlsnappy responsible for this decibel blowup, then therein you have the answer. And Mike says, you're aware this is a public space. As Mike says, this is a public space, but I have a right to worship. And then there's a Scientology security guard. And so he's on the stands now. And Prince asks him, the prosecuting attorney says, what do you do? He says, I do Scientology security, protect visitors and staff. Pearl was outside for several hours. She had a blowhorn and picket signs and a tripod. And we were having a church service happening in the middle of it. It was audible to hear from inside. And then she used her siren function. And then my boss said if I could get proof of her actions, that her actions are unreasonable, then I should record her. I did. Within 15 seconds, she went up to me, upset that I was recording her noise decibels. She, with her blowhorn, got in my face, pointed it towards me, and started screaming. Loud enough that the decibels were 73 to 120. Oh, man, I'm almost running out of time, guys. And so they're talking about the decibels. There's so much here. And now I'm running out of time. This makes me sad. So I'll look at... So look at what's the most important stuff. They're talking about the decibels. In the interaction, says Pearlsnappy's lawyer now, your goal is to remove protesters from the church. Yes, the security guard, now Pearl's lawyer is questioning security guard, Mr. Carrington. Mr. Carrington says, no, many parishioners were being harassed. Pearl's lawyer says, well, are you trained to read decibels? Carrington says, yes. Pearl's lawyer says, so you know the legal limit in Austin. You know that the low estimate is 73. You said that the estimate that you had, 73, is below the legal limit, which is 81. Next, whoops, and he kind of messed himself up with that. Self was on the stand as well. On the 12th, what happened to security? The Pearlsnappy's attorney asks. He says, we tried clarifying that we were violating anything, and we went out of our way to go to the police. So that's an important... and Selfless also remarks that he was an audio engineer. So Selfless did very well in saying he knows the ins and outs of audio, and he knows what's legal and what's not, and that he also went out of his way to question things. So now we will read the judge's statement, because we only have 30 seconds. Okay. The ruling leans on the statement of statute of what's reasonable. The reasonable actions of the alleged perpetrator are reasonable. The Constitution is not always convenient. However, the interactions do stem on what a reasonable person does. Actions the actions of the victim in turn are not reasonable.